It is Wednesday, April 6th. It's 7:35, and I call to order the meeting of the RTM Finance and Budget Committee. We're going to be doing the annual budget tonight. I do want to say something only because the Board of Ed has a similar meeting, but if there is any desire to make any adjustments on that part of the budget, I'm going to hold off until we have representatives here so that they can answer questions. If there are no suggested adjustments, we're just going to run through this. All right. I think that before we start with anything else, because it's going to deal with the first motion that we have, it's worthwhile to discuss where the fund balance is at this time. So as of the end of March, there was $25,541,140 in fund balance. Based upon the projections that are going on, we anticipate that there will be $29,980,927. And the component parts are 1.246, primarily from town clerk revenue. In the prior year, we budgeted 1.6. That came in at about 3.1. This year, we budgeted again 1.6. The town did, and they're coming in probably about 2.7. If you recall, F&B did ask to increase that budget amount last year. They did increase it this year. Town expenses as showing a surplus of about 1.3 million, and that's primarily due to some retirements in police and some other staff positions, which is really unusual because for the most part, town hall staff stay for a long time, which is why if we look at the distribution of the steps when we do contracts, a good percentage of them are at the highest level or near the high level because we have good longevity there. This year, about 80% of the surplus is based upon openings. The biggest part is police, which is about 560,000. There's, as you know, we have 2 new police captains. We've had some retirements there. We have 4 openings in the police department. And at the time that this was done, we have 2 in civilian dispatch. And from what I heard about from the OPC meeting today, a 3rd resignation came in this morning from civilian dispatch. So we've actually had the civilian dispatch at full staff at 9 for about 2 months out of the year. The other thing, which is really a good thing, is Park and Rec has been just hitting it out of the park on both their revenues and expenses, and you can't complain about that. So their revenue surplus is up $780,000, and the corresponding expenses of that is about $556,000. So that's generating about $230,000 net revenue out of Park and Rec programs. That's the 2nd year in a row. In June, we're going to have to do the same type of transaction we did last year by adding to expenses the appropriation and going against revenue. But the new special revenue fund that's been established, which we'll get into when we get into the budget, should eliminate this in future years. And Board of Ed is about 651,000 coming back. As we mentioned in the February reports, they had 6 additional students for ECR, and they budgeted for the current year a 67.5% reimbursement rate, and it's closer to 80. So the incremental change in the rate, as well as having the additional students, is adding that money back. But in total, that comes out to $3.4 million in amounts that the only way to say it is we've overtaxed our citizens for. It's the only way you can say it. Because some of these we suggested adjustments last year, and it unfortunately fell on deaf ears. The good thing is we're going to be using some of those funds. Remember, if it goes into the general fund, the only time we can use general fund funds is to buy capital at the end of the year, or if there's an extraordinary item in operations. We can't use it to offset operations, but it's going to go and be put against the capital. The Board of Finance voted to allocate $2.9 million. It's going to be our first item that we're going to be talking about. So they chose $2.9 million being transferred from the general fund to the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures. We did the same thing last year. And so the money will be sitting there at the end of the year. So July 1st, the money's in the bank for the capital items we have. That does, though, go on some of the other parts of the general fund. So, the minimum we want is a 12%, and it's based upon the budgeted revenue, general fund revenue, which this year will be $159 million. So 12% gives us a $19 million balance, which gives us an excess of about 6.995 million. But we never go to 12. The credit agencies rate on 5 different things, and one of the things that they do rate on is fund balance, and they want 30%. The next, that to get a AAA. To get a AA, you need to have 15%. And so part of what happens with us is that we get AAA on the other 4. We're at a AA on the fund balance, and partially offset by the fact that we can raise money at any time because of our tax base. But we really don't want to get below 15%. And another way to look at it is you really want to have 2 months worth of spend in your budget. So while we're taking 2.9 million out of the excess, we are adding another 500,000 back in. So it's not as if we're doing complete drawdown, which is also a negative. However, we were pretty much at 17% of our revenues throughout most of last year, if not higher. After the 2.9 being taken out, we're going to be at 16.4%, still above the 15. But another measure to look at, I was a little bit uncomfortable with what they took out. I would have liked a little bit less. And you'll see when we get to the final amount of what the increase year over year, I thought it was a little bit too much. But another way to look at where you want to be on your fund balance is that if you take 2 months worth of expenditures and do that over what the balance should be, we would need to be at about 16.54. So we're a little under the 2-month guidelines. We're still at the 15%. We're still AA, not affecting our rating, but it's something to be cautious of. If we do need, anything more than 2.2 million, which is what we have in excess of the 15%, next year we're going to be, providing we don't have, again, excessive balances on income and expense, we're going to be taxing to build back up that general fund. So I wanted to explain that because I think that's important to understand where the starting point is for tonight's resolutions and how we ended up with where we ended up. So the first resolution that we're going to do tonight,
Jack,
and I'll explain it. Go ahead.
before we go to the resolutions, can we go a little deeper into the money moving in and out of the fund balance? I think it's important to understand that the fund balance takes up all the money at the end of one tax year and provides some relief on the next tax year in terms of what's planned to take out of that pool of money. Like when you ran the Volpe report first, or the Board of Finance ran it first, there was no money coming out of the fund balance, and then there was the 2.9 million that you already mentioned. That changes everything. Okay. Now, I think a good way to look at the fund balance is it receives some money that is left over from a previous budget, both in the Board of Education budget and the Board of Selectmen, and it provides the money back into the operations for the next budget. Other
I'm going to
companies,
interrupt. You can only provide money back into capital.
Okay, so other companies may do it differently when they link two budgets. So some money washes into the pot from a previous budget and is then considered available automatically for the next year's budget. This is not what happens in the town because it's not available automatically, but we should always keep in mind when we look at the fund balance contribution for the next fiscal year, what has come in the previous fiscal year, because that explains a lot about a long-term position in the fund balance account and its contribution to the operating expenses and income and the budget. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so I'm going to make some corrections there because I don't fully agree with you. First of all, if we have excess like this, it cannot be contributed towards operations. It can only be used to pay down capital that's in the budget. So it can't be used for operations. That's number one. Number two, the amount that we're drawing down should not be exceeding the amount that we're contributing, because that's a negative if we're drawing down what our fund balance is on an annual basis. I think it was mentioned last night, in the last 5-6 years, we've only done it 1 year, and that's positive. However, I would agree in the small amounts that we might have, we get $500,000 back from the Board of Ed because we had higher excess cost reimbursement. We get $400,000 back from the Board of Selectmen, and we can use that to do a partial pay down of capital. When we're getting $3.4 million back in a single year, that is not good budgeting from the current year. I have no other way to say that. We didn't account for revenues properly, even though we knew that the town clerk was going very high. We did not, and with all fairness, because the budgets were really good on the Board of Selectmen side, but unlike the Board of Ed, where they have a department turnover, they don't have the equivalent on the Board of Selectmen side. So if we are going to see some turnover on an ongoing basis, especially for some entry level, be nice to have that contra expense account. I had a brief conversation with Kate about that. I'm not sure that we can legally. So that's something that I'd like to look at for next year's budget. And they the question, which is really the true one, is if we know that there's retirements and we're going to be replacing people or turnover, and we're going to be replacing people at a lower salary within the same grade, that should be built into the budget. And yet when I'm looking at the police budget from this current year that's under by 500,000, there's still an increase in the budget next year. So if in fact they end up with some openings remaining in the police force, because it's not, the vacancies isn't being totally consumed by overtime from the other officers that are having to fill it. Otherwise it would be a wash. But it's just that we, having some flexibility in each of these budgets, 1 or 2% is reasonable. Maybe 1%, but to have like a 2 to 3% come back to us at the end of the year just isn't good. I'm glad that we're using it to reduce taxes for the next year, but it's just not good budget.
Well, Jack, that wasn't the point of my observation. My point is that if originally in the Volper report that we sent out, we did not have the $2.9 million from the fund balance contribution and 100,000 from the reserve contribution, that should not, and we now have, that should not scare anybody. It is just a mechanism to show that money came in last year and now we can budget for this money, for some money, that money or other money to come back out, okay? There was no magic wand that reduced the increase in the mill rate from an originally contemplated 4.39% to 2.32%. It is just a result of the financial health of the organization.
And Bert, I'm going to disagree with you. I think that if you overtaxed your people in the prior year because you underreported revenues and you didn't have expenses properly, that's not a sustainable budget process. And that wouldn't be allowed in any corporate environment that either you or I were in. So we're fortunate this year that we have these revenues that are offsetting, and there's another revenue that we'll get into later that are offsetting this to allow us to cover some of the expenses that are higher when we actually get into the budget itself. But the numbers should be lower. We shouldn't count on it. And, I will say that some of this was an anomaly with the turnover in the police department this year. We don't typically have that big of a turnover. And we don't typically have the retirements that we've had in some of the other town hall departments. But on the revenue side, we had the same problem the prior year. We had it this year, and we just didn't address it. And the only adjustment we're making to the current year, again, I'm taking Park and Rec out of it because that's good work by the programs. But we were able to convince the Board of Finance to increase the town clerk revenue by 200,000. We shouldn't be anticipating that that's the pot of money that we're going to have next year by underreporting revenue again. I'm hopeful that's not the case. So that's I think that using it is good, all right, because we overtaxed our people in theory, and so we're now reducing their taxes in the subsequent year. All right, so that you're right on, but this is, too high of a return. I mean, I'm curious what other people think. Jenny?
Well, I tend to agree with you. I think we kind of got lucky in the fact that the surplus revenues, we're going to spend them this year, but the fact is we have surplus, and we have a lot of surplus. I have a question though. That you back to excess fund back to fund balance. You said, I just want to make sure I understand. You said fund balance can be used for capital and not for operating. Can it be used to prepay debt?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And it can be used for operating, but like like something special, like when we had COVID and we gave an incremental appropriation. And there's a couple of other appropriations that we give during the course of the year for unplanned budget items. But we can't take the 2.9 and go against the operating budget. So, we're limited in applying it towards capital. At the same token, and the chair of the Board of Finance was right, these are projected numbers. So some of that difference between the 3.4, which we're pretty sure on, and because things are tracking similar to last year on some of these numbers, and the 2.9 that was used gives us a little cushion on the projections that we still have for April, May, and June for those numbers to come in. And we still want to add to the general fund balance throughout this time. So I'm just mentioning that because this is one of the two items that have really helped this year's budget come in at the result that we're going to come in at. So, go ahead.
So, Jack, we don't disagree. I mean, apparently we don't disagree because that money is the town's money. It's coming from one year, and it's not going to get lost. It makes us more comfortable for the next year. We do disagree then only on the fact that you say that we should have planned better last year.
Mhm.
Okay, and I might say to that, if this is how we plan every year, and we always plan a little cushion, which we have, obviously, we never have a deficit at the end of the year, either for the town or the Board of Education. If you always have a cushion, well, then we know about the cushion, and then we will know about it for the next year and for the budget thereafter. That, of course, reduces some of the control that finance and budget has over what's happening, because in your words, you said the taxpayer has been overtaxed when you have these cushions. But I think over time it comes out all right, because the money is never lost.
Well, again, I believe that both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen need some flexibility in their budgets.
Yes.
This was too much flexibility, in my opinion. But Mark, you were going to say something.
Well, I agree with what Bert was saying. Having a cushion is not a terrible thing. I just want to understand, is the surplus that we're seeing consistently on consistent line items year in, year out? Because last year I recall being an extraordinary year, and whether consciously or subconsciously, it was an extraordinary economic environment to be doing a budget. So I'm not stunned that certain line items came in different than expected. But if we're seeing a pattern year in and year out of the same line items, I then tend to agree with you. But an aberration in a year like we've had this past year, in and of itself, doesn't necessarily startle me or bother me.
And I would agree that for the last 2 years where we thought there would be little activity in the housing market, there's been a boom.
Right.
And so the first year that caught us all by surprise. But since in speaking to real estate agents in town, we knew the boom was continuing. It's like that's where I felt that we should have made some adjustment to the budget. And it's just like total. If you look at total revenue, there's different things that go on. And as I said, I don't mind coming in with 500,000-600,000 for both budgets, so we end up with $1 million or so, $1.5 million combined. That's reasonable. But this is just a lot. That's my only point. And yes, it's extraordinary, but we did know that certain things could have been were going on, and they chose not to budget for it. We raised the town clerk in last year's budget meeting. So, yeah. But we have to vote on this first now before we can do any of the rest of the budget. Because the rest of the budget doesn't work. And by the way, the Board of Finance had a similar conversation on this, and we're all happy that we're going and using it to pay down capital so that where we overtaxed last year, we are not doing the same taxing this year because we're returning it to the taxpayers. So in that regard, I agree with Bert. So we need to have a motion to transfer 2.9 million from the fund balance to the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures for 2.9 million. So do I have somebody moving that motion? I have Mark, I have Beth second. Is there any further discussion? Are we ready to vote? Are there any no votes? Hearing or seeing none. Are there any abstentions? Hearing and seeing none. Is it safe to then assume that this is unanimously passed? Good. All right. Next. We will be dealing with, it's going to be 22 some number, and I have no idea which one it's going to be. So 22 something A, I need somebody to move resolve that an appropriation of $4,729,892 is hereby made from the reserve fund for the capital and non-recurring expenditures for the purpose of meeting expenditures of the town of Darien as shown by the budget this day approved. James, you had your hand up the last time. Can I have you move it? Do I have a second? I need a second. I got Mark. All right. So this amount was originally 4.8 million, but because we're transferring 100,000 out of the capital reserve into regular funds, it came down by 100,000. But it's basically our capital. All right, regardless of how we're paying it, this is the capital that we're going to be moving through for the year. And I'm going to go just to my next sheet. I did a little bit of a reconciliation of where we were. The final capital number in the budget is going to be 1.296. And by adding things back, you know, the revenue that we have there from LoSiP, rental of property, general fund transfer, capital reserve, we're bonding 3 items, being the sidewalk repair, new sidewalk, and the Darien High School track for about 1.3. And then for anybody who's been following, we the Board of Ed needs a Suburban in order to expedite that. The Board of Finance voted not at Monday's meeting, but at Thursday's meeting to authorize the use of $62,000 from the Reserve Fund for Capital. I think we talked about that at our last meeting. That was contingent upon the Board of Ed passing the similar resolution tonight, which they are doing. So that means effectively tomorrow, they can order the Suburban so that it shortens the delivery date. Some of the vehicles that they ordered in September have still not been delivered to the Board of Ed based upon chip shortages and other things that are happening in the automotive industry. So this is a good thing, but the original request for capital was $6,788,777. And that, please remember that we had $576,885 of this year's capital from the Board of Selectmen moved into ARPA. So if there's no conversation on item A. Are we ready to vote on that? Okay. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? Hearing no no's and abstentions, it passes unanimously. Item 22 something B. Resolved that an appropriation of $48,437,074 is hereby made from the general fund for the Selectmen's operating budget. Understand that part of the Selectmen's operating budget does include debt service and also includes the library. Just a little note on debt service. As if this wasn't a confusing enough year. We're going to work with Jen when we present the numbers to the RTM, because the Board of Selectmen operating budget looks like it's a 2.25% increase, but removed from the current year's Board of Selectmen budget, or another way to look at it, included in the fiscal year 22 adopted budget, is approximately $500,000 of park and rec expenses that are not in this current year budget because we're moving it to a special revenue fund. There was a slight adjustment on the interest expense for the year for approximately $111,000. That expense is in the fiscal 23 budget. However, since the $30 million that was issued in February was planned to be in the first half of the current fiscal year, there was approximately $220,000 of a payment that we thought we were going to make, but we're not making because we issued it in February, not the first half of the year. So the second half of the year payment isn't being made. So those funds were already in the bond fund. And so part of those funds were used to offset the issuance cost of the February bond, about 40,000. The remaining 180,000 is being moved into revenue to partially offset the incremental $111,000 of interest that we will have next year, because while we still got a AAA rate when we issued in February, as many people know, the rates went up between when the budget was done in the November-December period and when it was issued in February. So is there any other discussion on the Board of Selectmen budget? Go ahead, Martha. Oh, I should mention the other things. Go ahead.
I don't know if this is the appropriate section to bring this up, and I really haven't thought this through, but knowing that there's a chance that we will purchase the Ziegler property, I'm wondering, is there anything we should be doing differently vis-a-vis debt and bonding? I mean, I wouldn't want to jeopardize our ability to purchase that property and presumably do some development work. If you're going to spend that big of chunk of money, you want to start being able to use it soon. So, I mean, I know we're bonding sidewalks. I mean, we have some drainage projects which should be done in the future. They're going to be fairly costly. We have the, you know, the 50 million for the elementary schools coming up, and I saw the debt projection chart, but have scenarios been run to see the debt projection chart, as I understand it, did not include the 50 million for the elementary schools.
Well, first of all, let's keep the 50 million as being not the number. Let's have that new number for the 3 HHR be someplace between 70 to 80 million dollars.
Okay. All
right.
Right. Well, so yeah.
So yeah, because otherwise we'll have Chris Price having nightmares when he has to go and present the final number. And Mark, you're smiling because could you imagine if, and Martha, you should know also, if we came in with the public works garage, like 30 million under what we were anticipating, it was not going to be a nice project. But yeah, it's between 70 to 80. Here's what I'll say. I think it's an appropriate conversation, but can we pass the budget? Because I did ask these questions and I have some preliminary answers on that. But do you,
Yep.
if we want to add it to
Fine.
the agenda, I have no problem to have a high level conversation of what I've been told and go from there. But yes, part of the reason why I went through where we are in the general fund and what additional funds we would have in excess is exactly the point you're raising, which is why I might have been a little bit more conservative in the allocation of prior year's taxes to the current year budget. Last year our increase was 3.25. Another 3% increase wasn't going to be deadly based upon all the things that we were doing, and we're going to be much lower than that. So yes, but if you remind, we'll ask for new business and we can have a conversation. And Monica's on the horn, so if I say anything wrong, she can electrocute me during with, and if you see me jumping, then I know I've been told I said something wrong. So so can we go to the Board of Selectmen budget on, because this is their operations, and I know debt is included in that. But I should also mention that they did. Kate moved the Board of Finance contingency back up to 300,000, which is where we had it 2 years ago. Jamie moved it to 250. Kate moved it back up to 300. And based upon analysis that they did at the Board of Finance by David Martin, they showed that 250,000 was more than enough money. So they reduced it back to 250,000, which is what it is for the current year. So that's the main number that was adjusted on the Board of Selectmen budget. And it's sort of nice because it sort of offsets the things that were added by the Board of Selectmen to Kate's budget. So that's sort of like a wash now. And probably less when you add in what was being paid by ARPA. So is there any further discussion on the operations? Go ahead.
Now, I did not follow the police budget closely, but with 4 openings in the police department and 2 in civilian dispatch going to 3, is that reflected somehow in their budgeting for next year? First of all, I don't know when they assume people will be hired, and there are training costs associated with the hiring of many policemen anyway. And I just asking that question. I'm not going to change my vote or anything, but I think it should somehow have been reflected.
Well, some of it is reflected in the fact that if we know retirements are going, I had this conversation with Kate, if we know retirements are going, then when she's preparing the budget, will actually put a lower rate. We have a sergeant who's at the top rate retiring, and we have a new sergeant coming in. They're going to be at their appropriate rate, no different than when we do in the schools. I understand that, the chief is, this is still a good town to work in. And from the OPC meeting, I believe that it was announced that they have one person who should be entering the police academy to fill one of the 4 spots. And there may be as many as 2 other people making lateral moves to come in. So we may be down 1 during the course of the year at most, based upon what they know is going on.
Okay.
It was asked
I just want
why.
to reflected.
I think that it wasn't fully reflected on, like, they're going to be have a surplus of about 540,000 this year. But nobody reduced the police budget because you still have to give them the appropriation so that they can go out and hire people and staff. And that's where I think the conversation of having like a Board of Selectmen turnover number, similar to what they do in the Board of Ed, might be a viable way to account for some of these. But they pretty much left the budget as it is. So,
Okay.
and we're hopeful that they're able to fill those spots, at least by the start of the fiscal year. So I'm where you are, Martha. We just didn't have a mechanism to do it.
Right. And I forget, we still have 6 months or so, or 4 months, whatever, for them to hire.
And the chief is out there, looking at all different avenues and other things like that. And it's still a good town to work for. Chief responded that, one of the people who joined us a while ago said that our uniform allowance was more than the police officer who came from another police department in Connecticut, or maybe even New Hampshire. I think there's a couple of people coming down from there. That he said that our allowance for protective gear, this, that, and the other, was more than what this other officer had received in their former police department in the 10 years they worked there. So there are some positives for our police force. I had a side conversation with the chief. And if you recall, there was that test going on for electronic filing of paperwork. That seems to have not gone any place and failed, not because of us. And the other thing is that the training module that they got as a gift that had the laser guns and this and other things like that, that's moving along nicely, and they're bringing up another new module on that this month. So, I mean, I figured while we were there, I'd call him in the hallway to just check up on some of the other things we've approved years being. So that seems to be moving along. All right. If there's no other comments on the Board of Selectmen budget, are we ready to vote? Okay. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? The Board of Selectmen 22 something B then passes unanimously. That brings us to 22 something C, resolved that an appropriation of $110,607,116 is
Excuse me,
hereby
Jack?
made.
Did
Yeah.
anybody move that in the last one?
I believe we did. Did we?
I'm
I
sorry.
had Mark. No, I had James. Well, let's
That was for you.
just double think. All right. So
We moved,
let's,
we had James move for the appropriation of 4.7 million for the reserve fund
Okay.
for capital non-recurring, but we didn't, and then Mark seconded, but I don't think we had a motion to move. Sorry.
so let's go back to B and move it.
Sorry.
I'll
We
be
gotta
happy to do,
move it.
which I'd be happy to do.
Okay, so Bert moves, Beth seconds, and we'll do votes again. Are there any
Thank
no votes? Thank you, Jenny. Are there any abstentions? It passes unanimously now that we moved it. So I'm going to read it and we're going to move it first, and then we can have our conversation so we don't run into this throughout the rest of the meeting. Resolved that an appropriation of $110,607,116 is hereby made in the general fund for the education operating budget. Can I have somebody move that? I see Beth. I need another hand. I see Mark as second. Okay. So again, and it's up to you guys, I'll pass around the report that we will have. I thought there was an opportunity, and there's certain things that we mentioned during the course of the budget that we weren't necessarily thrilled with. All right, it's still coming in at a 3.74%, basically being the big drivers that is adding 8 or 9 FTEs. And while we have taken a position of not complaining about anything in the social emotional area or those that support education, there were some staff positions that, you know, we had raised during the budget. Interesting enough, during the Board of Finance meeting, nobody raised the incremental 8 positions that were coming on. Can't do anything about that. This budget is what the budget is. And does anybody have a desire to make any modifications to the Board of Ed budget? Hearing crickets? I guess we're ready to vote. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? Seeing none of the other two, we'll pass that unanimously. Resolution 22 something D is resolved that the above appropriations totaling $159,044,090 for the purpose of meeting the expenses of the town of Darien for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2022 and ending June 30th, 2023, as shown by the budget this day approved. That's adding. I think we can do that without any question. Can I have somebody move that we can add?
I move because it's just the 2 items we already approved unanimously. And so that's a no-brainer.
Okay, so Bert moves, James seconds, and the fact of the matter is this has been double checked by Jen, Kate, the world, the Board of Finance, myself. And so we do add the 2 numbers together and come to this number. All those in favor, raise your hands. If it's unanimous, then we're not even going to ask for the noes and the abstentions. Okay, so we get to E, and I wanted to add some other color to this. As some of you may have heard back in January, our grand list was announced. And just to remind it for everyone, other than Martha, who knows how to do this better than any of us, the way it takes it is we take the grand list, we make adjustments for state and local tax relief. We determine a collection rate of what we've had over the last 5 years, and then we reduce that average that we had over the last 5 years by 25 basis points, and I'll get into that. And we multiply that collection rate times the grand list less the state tax relief to come up with what the adjusted grand list is. The adjusted grand list has increased by 1.99%, going from $8,542,000 in change to $8,712,000 in change. And so one of the things I like to do is that if we take the differential, which is the $170 million on that grand list, and multiply it times the mill rate of last year, which was the 16.84, that increase in the grand list results in the town having an incremental $2.8 million. And that's what's covering. Now, you know, when I speak to Kate, you know, part of the reason, if you remember, in the Board of Selectmen, we added another person to the fire marshal to do inspections, because part of this is the new projects that are coming online, some that are completed. And so we need additional staff. So some of that money is covered. But since we're not paying 2.8 million to the person doing our fire inspections, that's still a heck of a lot of money to bring down the expenses and the taxes that were there. So when you add the 2.8 to the approximately 3 million that we're taking out of the reserve fund for capital and the money that we brought back from this year, the projected amount, that's about $5-6 million of coverage. That is substantial, and why we're going from the higher expenses to a more reasonable rate. And when we do our presentation to the full RTM, I'm going to be working with Kate to go and review that. I do want to know that the adjustments on tax relief, which are typical things like we have estate veterans, we have local veterans, and we do have a veteran here, so I'm happy that they can take use of it. We have volunteers that get a $1,000 towards their tax bill, being personal property or residential, but their name has to be on the bill. And we have the senior taxes. Kate and Jen did a review. There may be one or two other minor ones, but those are the main ones. Kate and Jen did a review of the tax relief that had been bumped up a couple of years ago because of the pandemic and before. And they determined that they were too high and that our volunteer tax relief isn't as high as what we had been projecting. And so there's a reduction of $2.6 million or 6% in the adjustment on tax relief from last year to this year. All right. That doesn't account for why we're making 2.8 million. It has a lot to do with the growth that's going on. And we really still haven't seen the real growth from these three projects. So our tax collection rate went up slightly from 99.7% to 99.72%. The adjustment that we do for 25 basis points is two things. Number one, we want to make sure that we're maintaining a 99.7% collection rate, which is pretty high and pretty good, but there can always be some fluctuation depending upon what's going on. The other thing is that we're using the amount that we used in the grand list that I mentioned. The full grand list was $8,795,449,285. And that has adjustments during the course of the year. There's some additions, there's some subtractions, you know, the supplemental comes in, and there's a whole bunch of other things that go in there. So this is what we're using based upon the January 31st number. But Jen runs a really good report that does a comparison of what the grand list was, what it ends up, what our collection rate was against that, what it is against the final grand list. So those 25 basis points, which is between 300,000 to 400,000, gives a little bit of flexibility and coverage for any changes to the grand list that might occur during the course of the year. So I mentioned that before we get into E. E states resolved that a tax of 17.23 mils is hereby levied upon the last complete grand list of the town with a total tax net assessment of $795,249,285 on the property as of October 1st, 2021, payable in two equal semi-annual installments, the first installment to become due and payable on July 1st, 2022, and the second installment to become due and payable on July 1st, 2023, provided, however, that 1, any taxpayer may pay both of said installments on July 1st, 2022. 2, the personal property tax on motor vehicles in said town shall become due and payable in one single installment on July 1st, 2022. Any property tax in the amount not in excess of $100 shall become due and payable in one single installment on July 1st, 2022. Do I have somebody moving that?
Jack,
Beth? Yep.
the only thing I'd say is I move that, but except to say that instead of what you said is the second installment to become due and payable on July 1st, 2023, when I think what you meant was January 1st, 2023.
Yes, I did mean that exactly, and thank you for the correction.
Okay, with that correction, I so move that.
Good. So we have a second on my correction of reading poorly. James,
Jack, it's good to have a lawyer in the group.
it's good to have several lawyers in the group.
I second.
I had James second.
Okay.
The increase in the mill rate, we had originally, and I put this down before, the total expenses prior to the adjustments and everything else like that, the increase in required taxes was 4.39%. With the various reductions in the capital that we've already mentioned, the increase goes to 2.32%, which to me is phenomenal in this environment. Don't like how we get there, but it's a bad way to get there, but a good result. So I don't know. So that's good. So any further discussion on that? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? Are there any noes? Are there any abstentions? I'm assuming that then it's unanimous. Item F, 22 something F. Resolved that the town of Darien, acting through the Board of Selectmen and subject to the approval of said town at the annual budget meeting of the representative town meeting to be held May 9th, 2022, be authorized to borrow on a note or notes of the town in the sum of $5 million or so much thereof as may be necessary for the general expenses of the town pending the collection of either or both of said semi-annual installments of taxes on or prior to June 30th, 2023. This is a cash management just in case monies don't come in. We can borrow. During the first year of the pandemic, we moved that up to 10 million because we weren't sure what the collections were going to be. It's back down for the last 2 years to 5 million. And to the best of my knowledge, the town has never drawn on this funds, and we don't pay anything to have this line of credit available to us. So can I have somebody move that? Jenny, Mark is second. Irish, you get the next one. Any discussion on this?
I just want to mention, Jack, since this liquidity line provides liquidity, when we do a look at the liquidity that the town's investment book provides, we should always keep in mind that there's some extra liquidity available. In the very, very, very unlikely case, the liquidity is not sufficient in the investment book, that we have secondary liquidity from the line that we just approved. So I'm just mentioning it for good order's sake. I have no other intention.
Thank you for the last part of that.
Especially for the last part.
The you're smiling too much, like a Cheshire cat there, Bert. The yeah, the other thing is while we're talking about that we have like 26, 28 million in the general fund, that's the accounting balance. There's a lot of, we get approximately $70 million in July and another 70 in actually, believe it or not, December, January, and February timeframe on this. We also get supplemental tax in October. We get various revenues throughout the course of the year, you know, when you're doing for the transfer sticker or for the beach sticker. And based upon the expenses, there's some outlay, like teachers can get paid for their whole summer in June versus getting paid on a monthly basis. But the total amount of cash that's in our bank, or banks, if I want to say that, is rather substantial. So that's all I'm saying, is that we typically don't need to do it because we can borrow between funds. And I'm just talking about unassigned general fund balance. Remember, we're going to have about $6 million in the ARPA funds. We have significant money sitting in the capital funds. And then there's other fund balances that we have during the course of the year. So, did we vote on F? Nope. Okay, so let's vote on F. Are there any no votes? Seeing none. Are there any abstentions? Seeing none. Let's say it passes unanimously. Okay, we got two more, and then we can have that conversation, Martha. 22 something G. Resolved that the following appropriations for other funds are hereby made as a detail below for the 2022-2023 fiscal year as shown by the budget this day approved. $4,177,360 for sewer operating fund for the purpose of meeting expenses of the town of Darien and the sewer commission. $200,000 for the sewer assessment fund. $152,600 for the sewer capital fund. $710,400 for the parking lot administration fund. $390,000 for the parking lot capital fund. And by the way, those five funds we've been doing every year. We do have a new one here, $950,000 for the recreation program fund, which is the special revenue fund where the park and rec revenue will be going and the related expenses to serve those funds will be going. And then the net amount is transferred into revenue at the end of the fiscal year for 2023. So do I have 22 something G being moved? Iris, you were supposed to do that, I recall. Thank you. Peter, we'll let you second on this. Is there any discussion on these funds? Seeing none. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? Well, we're going to say that it passes unanimously. Now, here it is. One of the things that I just want to put down in, and just so that this is where the 1.3 million that we talked about that we're going to be bonding for the new sidewalks, repair sidewalks, and the Darien High School track. It takes about 30 days, from what I understand, to get all bond counsel and everything written up and get all the background done. We will not be seeing that on budget night, that bond. We will be seeing that bonding appropriation and the appropriation and the bonding at our June meeting. I will also say that it was determined, since the fire engines, the fire departments are at different stages, having to do, they have teams where they evaluate what they need. They come up with a 10-page listing of what the requirements are. And then when they're really starting to go for what that final is, it's about 150 to a 200-page document that details everything from what light bulbs they have in various component parts of those big machines, what mill the wires are, and everything else like that. It was decided that those would be done off budget so that when the fire departments are finalized and they're down to the needing to put in an order on that, at that time it'll come to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the RTM for both an appropriation and bonding. And once again, we cannot thank Jenny enough for all of the work that she did last year to make this happen. And so I'm going to call the fire engines the Jenny bonds. But again, thank you for what you did. I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on that one. The last resolution of the night is 22 something, one after what we just did for all the budget and for the appropriation, is a resolution appropriating $55,665,000 to refund certain of the town's outstanding bonds and authorizing the issuance of refunding bonds or amounts available in unassigned fund balance to finance such appropriations. That, Jenny, is the answer to, if you recall, when we needed to do some early retirement of debt a couple of years ago after we cleaned up the various reserve funds that in our quote-unquote joint venture with the Board of Finance that was done by F&B. The resolution didn't allow us to use unassigned fund balance, and so we had to modify this resolution in December so we could do it, and now that modification is included. So extra costs can be used to refinance or pay down debt. The amount usually was about 60 million, but it's been going down as out of our total amount of bonds that we have, this is the amount that allow us to call and go there. And so I need somebody to move this motion. I have Jenny and I have Martha seconding it. Is there any additional conversation on this? Jenny, go ahead.
Just a comment, I didn't, and I think we brought this up the last time they did a refunding. First of all, it lists the 2012 and 2015 bonds, which were already, you've already called them. I don't know if that should be taken out because I think they're defeased. The second thing, I didn't know if there was a any kind of savings target criteria that in which they would basically decide to execute a refunding. Are they just going to do it? Is there a floor as to how much they would want to see in savings before they went and executed, or is it just by feel? However, whatever it is. Is there a present value savings target that they would put in there? Just, I don't know if they thought about it. It's not in here, but just a comment of when would they pull the trigger on that?
Okay, so let me answer that. What you just said is well above my pay grade and even my understanding of that part of the market. What I would ask you to do, if you have no problem, is have a conversation with Jen. And at our next meeting, can you come back and tell us what you have found out? And if you want to involve Louisa in that, or Bert as well, but as I said, I understand certain things on bonding, but I do keep a book that says Bonding for Dummies right next to my desk whenever we go and do budget time. And we're fortunate that you, Louisa, and Bert are around. But yeah, Jenny,
I'll call
call
her.
Jen and see what you're finding out, and we can set up some time with Jen to discuss that, and invite Mr. Palin to join us as well on that.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. So we have that moved, we have it seconded. It's time to vote. Are there any no votes? Are there any abstentions? Oh, yes, that's right. Sorry, there is an abstention. And so it's still unanimous because the abstention doesn't change the vote, according to Robert's Rules of Order. So, but I will report that there's an abstention there when I do the report. That brings us to what I had on the agenda, with the exception of minutes. But in order to go back to what Martha asked, all right, I need to be able to amend the agenda to have a high-level conversation of where we are credit-wise and other things based upon that, and just high level. I mean, there's only so much information we have. So do I have somebody move to do that? I have Martha. Do I have a second on that? I have Iris. I'm just going to ask all those in favor, say aye, raise your hand. Good. So Mark, yeah, okay. So it's unanimous, and therefore we're amending the agenda. So I asked the question because I believe we have about 70 million outstanding. Over the next 5 years, we're going to pay down about 30 million. And if you looked at that chart that Jen put out, you saw that we're going from about 11 million down to about 4 or 5 million on an annual basis on a debt payment. Schools, which we have, is going to range between 70 to 80 million based upon the calculation that was done using the April 2021 estimates, putting in an inflation factor, 10% contingency. So they have a range of what's going on. We'll have a better idea of that come actually mid-May, because that's when they're going to have to report to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance before it comes to us in June. But again, similar to Ox Ridge, from when we approved that, the initial funding a number of years ago, we first issued in February the final debt aspect on that to cover what we anticipate the final expenses will be for the course of the project. So it's going to take a number of years before we're even ready to do it. And we're not going to start, we can't start building on this. That's the key of the June 30th date. Where we need to get all the paperwork, all the funding for the 3 projects in and done by June 30th, so that the state that evaluates each of these projects independently will start that probably sometime in December or so. If we miss the June 30th deadline, it doesn't mean we can start work on it, waiting for their analysis. We lose the opportunity for any reimbursement. So that's why June is important. Otherwise, we're delaying it for another year. So if you add another 70 to that, that brings us up to about 110. We have minor things that are coming in and around. So I asked if if we're over 200 million in debt, does that bring us over where we should be? You know, at one time I heard if you take the grand list, multiply it by 2%, that was the range that they were looking for. That may not be the case here because of our ability to pay. If this initiative can be done by June 30th, which would be very tight, we might be able to put it out into 30-year paper. Governor Lamont did an executive order that allowed all municipalities to do 30-year paper. That expires June 30th. It stays for schools, but for any other municipal debt, it goes away June 30th. If we don't do the June 30th date, we would be doing 20-year paper, and that changes the cost of the project. I had some rough ranges. I don't know that it's been made public, so I'm a little bit hesitant to give, but let's just say roughly in the range of maybe 5 million if we're doing 30-year paper, and maybe 7 million, let's say, if you're doing 20-year. You know, when I got some other numbers, I was told, well, you know, if we do 30-year, we pay more interest. Being that I'm a cash flow type of guy, I'm saying, you know, I'm going to be 100 years old when we finish paying this off. So I don't care what the present value of the money is 15, 20 years from now, even though it's more interest over the life of the loan, it's still money real far out. So, but fortunately, I don't get a vote on that until it comes to the RTM. That I'm told that it would not affect our credit rating.
Are we talking, Jack, are we talking about the Ziegler property? Is this?
Yes, we are. Yes.
Okay, so we're wildly speculating because none of us knows what's going to happen.
We said that. We said this is high-level speculation.
So if the objective of these discussions is to communicate to the taxpayers that we will be very conscientious about whatever monies need to be spent and borrowed, that is a good thing, okay? The taxpayer already, after tonight's discussions, might get away with a wrong impression that we rubber stamp what the executive branch has proposed, because any decision we made tonight was unanimous. So, but that is only because we were involved from day one into the discussions. And I would assume that FNB will be involved in the discussions if the town will take on a major project like the Ziegler property. My own view on that is, and I have no insight, is only what Monica said to the DMA, that this would be trophy property. This would be the Waveney of Darien if we can secure it. And I do agree. So, but that's only the emotional side. There's a financial side, and that's very important. And that's what we're discussing here. The financial side, we don't know how the components will ultimately come together. I would assume there is an element of PPP, public-private partnership, where the town will not do that alone. And there's also some other fundraising involved, and maybe some of the money, some of the purchase price can be reduced by having a not-for-profit structure where there's some taxes that can be saved. All of that, we don't know now. I have every confidence that Monica, who has been authorized by the Board of Selectmen to lead the discussions, will come back with something tangible And I think the only thing F&B should be doing at this point to communicate to the taxpayer that whatever happens, we will be very conscientious on the impact on the budget, on the financial structure of the town, and everything that comes with that. That's my comment.
Bert, I fully agree. I apologize, I stepped away. The dog has to go out for a little bit. I fully agree. We have not had any information on due diligence, but I know that a question was asked, a similar question to what Martha raised was asked at the RTM Education Committee when we were talking about just adding on the HHR project to what our debt structure is now. But the only thing that I want to say that I can comment on is that the question was, would this affect our rating? And I've been told that if we went for the maximum amount and what we have with the other debt that's coming on, it would not affect our rating. So that I can say I've been told. As for, and so I want to pass that along. I've been told that. I had a conversation with Jen on that. And so she felt confident that it would not affect our rating based upon the other factors. As for when this does come through, I can promise that this team of folks will have some very sharp pencils and understanding everything that's going on, because it's not just what the debt service is. It's not just what our rating is. It's what the potential change in, lost tax revenue that it might be. It's the cost to maintain this. It's the cost whether or not some of the debt that we would be issuing, depending upon how we're doing the structure, some may be tax-free and some may not. And so if it's not, that's a slightly higher rate, but nothing that's going to kill us. So,
and some of it may lead to town revenue.
yes,
right? Yeah, you're always concerned about town revenue. Some of it may lead to town revenue too.
yes, fully. So there's a lot of questions. My understanding that Seth at the OPC meeting today raised some of these issues. And, with all fairness to Monica and the team that she's put together on this, they're first going through it, and we have to give them a chance to work this through. And having worked with Monica on a couple of issues in the RTM, and I know Mark, you're in the same way on this. Monica will be dotting I's and crossing T's along the way, and making sure that people are involved and giving input in that. So, the first thing I can say is I have confidence in Monica and the team that's moving forward on this. And the other thing that I know Monica has confidence is that F&B will be asking some very tough questions along the way and being our typical pain in the butts. So I think that emulates everything that you just said before. Jenny, go ahead.
Just a quick comment, and I reiterate what you're saying. I have confidence in Monica and the team. I know, Monica, you're listening, and I just want to say for the record, it's very exciting times for Darien right now, and there's a lot. I don't want to get too overly optimistic, but I commend everyone who's done this, the footwork so far, is to even open the door for conversation on this. So, standing by.
Is there anything, Martha, did we sort of address what you raised earlier? Because I think that was part of they didn't specifically say it, but I had a concern that we may have spent a little bit too much on bringing down the taxes to 2.32%. That's just my opinion. You have to unmute, Martha.
So, sorry. No, I think this is a tremendous opportunity. And, you know, I want to be sure we have a debt picture that allows us to take on something as significant as this.
Martha, that was my question, which is why I had a conversation with Jen, and she was very open and straightforward with me. They've already gone through certain numbers. I'm not releasing those numbers because that's not my position to do that. That's something that the Board of Selectmen should be doing, or Jen should be doing. But they have gone pretty deep into this already to do some evaluations. So she did tell me that I could say what I said. I was given that permission. Anything else on this other than we're excited, and that means we're probably going to have to work, and you know, people should not be planning on going too far away in August, because we may be all coming back to go and improve this if we don't do it before then. And hopefully we're successful. And Monica, we're wishing you the best of luck on this. So if there's nothing else on this topic, we do have minutes from the last meeting. And once again, Jenny has amazingly thought to actually listen to our meetings, even though she wasn't there, and generate minutes that are outstanding. And so again, Jenny, we want to thank you. But do I have somebody to move the minutes? I have Iris. I have Beth with a hand sort of like up there based upon the angle of the computer. All in favor, just say aye, and then we don't have to do the rest of the stuff. So they pass unanimously. And, you know, we started a bit late, and so we're an hour and a half, but our prior two meetings were a half an hour. So I guess everything evens out in the wash. And do I have if there's nothing else, we can have a motion to adjourn. I want to thank I do want to thank everyone for everyone's hard work that they did once again on this budget. I'm very fortunate to be the face of you guys. But it's a very strong team that's here. You know, things have changed. There's a new chair on Board of Finance, so not everything was as good as what it, you know, some things worked better, some things didn't. But it's always a learning experience, and we'll continue to grow and work as best we can with the other boards. I think we have a very good relationship with the Board of Selectmen and an excellent one with the Board of Ed. And I'm very proud that we've been able to do that. And I have all of you to thank for that. So thank you. And now I'll take a motion to adjourn. And we're done real early on budget this year. I have Mark to move. I have Jenny to second. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
And we want to thank the chairman, since I'm the oldest in age, not in seniority. I want to thank the chairman. We came to an early conclusion of our budget. I want to thank the clerk. Very soon she will be able to write the minutes before our meeting. That's how good she actually is. And Jack, thank you for all you're doing and keeping this team together. Thank you.
Well, it's because we have a good team that keeps us all informed in that. And so, you know, we're very lucky. But with that, let's all have, if I don't see you beforehand, have a very happy Passover, Easter, Mother's Day, Father's Day, or anything else that we might be having coming down the road. And we'll see everyone on the 18th.
Great job, Jack. Thank you.
Take care.
Jack.
We can end this.